3 people, and you're going to have 4 weeks. Do something.
It started out of pure stubbornness, which is great.
Without necessarily meaning to, I think we found this quite interesting niche.
No, we did some stuff, and the fact that it's invisible means it worked.
I think art is encoded knowledge and experience.
At that time, we were really fascinated by the whole transmedia concept.
That was it, not the time-travelling robot idea that we had.
Hello, I'm Sam Fry, and this is the Technique Podcast, the podcast where we speak to artists about technology. It's currently late March, and I'm recording this from my home in southeast London, and we are just starting to get used to the idea of self-isolation, given the coronavirus pandemic. So I just wanted to start this episode by saying that I hope you, whoever you are, wherever you are based, are keeping safe and healthy. Clearly, the coronavirus has disrupted many things, but one thing is certainly doesn't stop is the creation of podcasts. So here, at least, things stay normal. In today's episode, we have a great discussion that my co-host Richard F. Adams had with a British digital artist called Alex May. Alex is an artist and technologist that works with code on a variety of projects. He's well known for his work with video mapping, but as you will hear, the work includes him exploring areas like biology, robotics, and interactivity. The conversation is something of a rambly chat, which I think is good to listen to as they speak about Alex's background and the challenges that digital artists face. So here we go. I'll hand over the conversation where we will join Alex explaining how he got drawn into using technology in the arts.
It comes from a long interest in programming, and when I was 8 years old we got the first home computers coming out, and I got one. I was just like, yep, I'm just going to do this now.
Which one?
ZX81.
Spectrum 48.
Oh, I had that afterwards. but,
I know, yeah.
It was actually broken. It was the one that I got. You had to plug a tape recorder into it so you could save and load data from the standard audio cassette tapes. And mine didn't work, and it wouldn't save or load anything. We phoned up, Sinclair Research, and they were like, "There's been this huge demand, and we can't send you another one for like 3 months." And when you're 8 years old, like 3 months is like about a year.
It's an eternity. Isn't it?
And it was just like, I can't be without this thing. So I kept this broken computer, and basically I would type in programs, which was this very laborious process. And then once I'd finished using it, I'd pull the power plug out, and it would kill the program, and the program was gone. And if I wanted to use the program again, I'd have to type it in again. And you learn to be quite good at programming.
Yeah.
If you do that enough.
I remember it well.
Perverse practice, you optimise your code quite. So you have to type left. I mean, you probably remember, you go down to the newsagent, you buy magazines, and they have thousands of lines of code in the magazine, and you sit there and you type it in and you run the things. Yeah, so I was just completely fascinated by that, and I've been programming ever since, and I code everything for all the work that I do. So if you look at my work, it's quite different in terms of what types of projects that I do. Lots of robot stuff that I do with Anna.
Did you come at this from a programming angle then?
Yeah.
So you came from a programming or science background?
No, it's just technology and art. I mean, at the time, my dad was like a journalist, and he was getting these incredible images sent over from America of all the CGI that they were working on, all the sort of cutting-edge kind of flight simulator stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously this was a massive difference between my black and white ZX81 screenshot and this sort of flight simulator things. And so there was this massive difference, and I was just fascinated with how you could sort of do this and the processes. And obviously now I can do that stuff on my desktop.
Do it on your phone, probably.
Yeah. So this sort of democratising of technology, I've sort of seen it play out and seen how it's sort of affecting people in society, and that's sort of what I'm really interested in. And I'm interested in seeing it from the position of somebody who knows the code, who knows what's going on behind the curtain, and seeing how it has an effect on society and people, and how through social networking and through sort of, I don't know, dating apps or whatever, how we've had our normal human existence sort of put through technology, and has now been sort of as a sort of proxy for it.
When did you start calling yourself an artist?
10, 12 years ago. I mean, everyone was like, oh, you're really good at programming, get a programming job. All the kind of art stuff. I did art A-level, and it was all weird stuff, and I was just a weird kid,
I know it well.
Yeah. now I'm just not a kid anymore, but the other bit has not changed. So everyone was like, look, don't do this weird art stuff, It was the first year they did video art. You could put video art in. And I went to town. I generated everything on computer. I did all the music on the computer. I used video with overlaid computer graphics. I did 3D rendering and 2D animation. I was just absolutely so happy to create this sort of 5-6 minute video, put it in, and they hated it. And they absolutely... I only got squeezed through the A-level because I'd written this quite good essay on the history of 3D photography, I think. And basically I was just completely put off it. And everyone was like, you're a programmer, go and earn money. So I did. I went and worked in web programming and back-end stuff. But I was working 8 hours a day on like a 9-to-5 sort of job. And I go home and I work 8 hours on my own stuff. And it was still sort of going on, and I spend sort of 8 hours asleep. And eventually it was just like, I'm just not enjoying the limitations of working in a 9-to-5 job in technology. You only get to work with a certain amount of technologies if you suddenly want to go and work with robots, and it's just like, no one's going to let you do that because it makes no commercial sense.
Is that where you sort of mentally, if you like, changed state and became an artist?
I guess I always did. It was that point where you sort of have to admit it to yourself.
It's like being an alcoholic in some sense.
I've got a problem, I'm an artist. I started in about 2000 when I came across the VJ scene, because it was this thing where you could bring technology into clubs and you're creating this sort of visual thing. It was all real time, which was really fascinating to me. I could code things during the day. I would write real-time video effects. And then I'd take them to a club and perform with them that night. And they rarely crashed, which was good. That's what really got me back into working with sort of visual stuff and real-time technology, and rekindled that thing. So did that for several years. Didn't really enjoy the club environment as a...
Well, I was going to ask you, what was exciting about that? Because I used to go to the Heaven techno thing in the 90s, and it felt very fresh and exciting, and I guess you were part of that scene in that sense.
Yeah,
maybe not directly, but the techno
sort of.
Tuesday night or whatever it was, I can't remember. It's years ago. But there was a whole raft of people who just suddenly took hold of this technology and began to play with it. And I mean, what really sort of got you excited about it?
It was taking a high level of technology that was real sort of cutting-edge stuff, and this sort of very enthusiastic and very supportive group of VJs around the world, and taking it into a context which was outside of a sort of geeky technology thing and putting it kind of centre stage.
Yeah, it wasn't for a SIGGRAPH after conference party.
No, it was
for people in a club.
And you could do whatever the hell you wanted, and you could... Yeah. Not everyone liked it, but you could, you were there, bashing away.
What used to
MIDI
limit
keyboards.
it most? Was it the technology or was it the concept?
I didn't feel it was limited at all. I mean, now, I think I was working at 320 by 240 resolution.
Yeah.
This was before graphics cards, and so it was all. And to get real time stuff, it had to be really low. And I really liked reacting to the music in real time. I spent years writing all these bits of software which would do real time analysis of music, and then send MIDI signals, so I could sort of have extra hands, basically, and control stuff.
I mean, this is the beginning, obviously, of interest in robotics and things.
In a
sense.
Yeah, that sort of, and that feedback, and then you see how the audience sort of reacts. I mean, you're sort of removed from it because you're sort of up in the DJ booth, or worse. Yeah, it was just a really interesting way to sort of interact with people, and people would sort of come up and they'd be interested in the technology, and they'd be interested in sort of these ideas, and they get people come up and they'd have these moments where they'd see something in the visuals that they really resonated with them, and they would come up, God, I love that thing you just did with the... But you don't notice it. you know, you're in this flow state of performance. And
It is a performance, isn't it?
Yeah, and I used to get in this complete trance, like as I said, it's this flow state thing, and I'd be sort of, you know, on my MIDI keyboard controlling all the graphics, and then people would sort of come up and they'd refer to something that I did, but I don't remember it specifically, but it meant a lot to them. I mean, I have a certain style which I developed over the years, which is this sort of very kind of slow-moving multi-layers of videos. I'm trying to create sort of juxtapositions and abstract meanings, so they're there to be interpreted. But some hit people really hard. I can't control that.
Did you ever take some of that feedback back and try and develop them?
It encouraged me to continue on doing the sort of stuff that I was doing, but I was trying to sort of develop my own style and my own feel. And I mean, VJ now is a very different world, and people sort of tend to use other people's video clips. But at the time, people were sort of inventing their own styles. There was a guy who I think it was called Manny too, who used to just work in black and white, and that was his thing. You know, and then there were other people sort of doing. You know, we're all trying to sort of develop our own sort of feel around.
I think you're still doing live performances, aren't you, occasionally?
Yeah, but it's more sort of video mapping, and because I wanted to get out of the club thing, because I was putting all this effort and time into doing these things. And after about an hour, nobody's interested in watching your carefully honed.
They're not there to watch things.
They're there to dance with people and meet people and get drunk and whatever.
But the scene itself has evolved to the point where, obviously, technology, art, etc., has its own life now. At that point we're talking about, it was very much people like ourselves just experimenting, and we'd find venues to do things or whatever. But there's now a sort of tradition, and there are people who understand it. So what are the performances like that you're doing now, then, with things like video mapping? Because that's much more focused, I would say, in a technological sense.
I mean, to me, it feels very similar to the VJ stuff, where I'm sort of trying to create these juxtapositions of things which are pleasing to myself, but they're around a theme or a sort of idea. But the video mapping thing is great, because you can actually introduce a three-dimensional element, and it becomes more of a sort of sculpture. I started working with a sound designer called Martin A. Smith, who does these beautiful sort of soundtrack pieces, and we just gelled, and we started doing things in like Holland Park in London, and doing these sort of things that you sort of walk through, and these sort of soundtracks and video projections. And after that, I didn't do club stuff anymore, just because people came to see that work. They weren't going there to just get drunk.
To me, it's kind of the point at which it grew up a little bit. It feels that things have matured more, and we've now got that tradition of computer art going back, 50, 60 years, a significant body of work, significant artists, different genres within that are starting to clearly emerge. We've talked earlier about, bio-art, a completely new sort of field emerging. And similarly here, you've got the technology now has got to the point where you can start to actually really properly explore it as a medium, rather than, as you say, just piecing together bits of video and this, that, and the other, live editing, if you like. Yeah. Classic DJing with video, really. But you've gone much further. This is just by way of context. I mean, you've gone down the full route now into robotics and things like that. Yeah. One of the things I was sort of obviously reading about on your website was Archaeobot.
Yes.
Which I was fascinated by, because that seems to be something where you've gone now the whole hog down, and you've got something that you built, something that's intelligent in some sense. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So fundamentally, it's an underwater robot, which obviously presents a multitude of complexities in its construction. But
it has to be waterproof for one.
Yeah, a long period, because we do these shows and they're like 2.5 months. It's like, you want an underwater robot that works for 2.5 months. Okay. So certain challenges. We're working with Amanda Wilson at Imperial College, and they're studying real archaea. They're one of the branches on the tree of life. And for a long time, we kind of thought there was the eukaryotes, which are the celled organism with the nucleus in the cell, which is us and trees and birds and insects and all these things, and then there's bacteria. But there's also this other branch called archaea, which they think is like the oldest life forms. There was confusion because they looked like bacteria, but they were actually genetically far more similar to us.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're sort of all around us.
So obviously the initial inference from that would be, oh, they're our ancestor.
Somewhere down.
Yeah, right down the line, yeah.
Some of them are extremophiles, so they live in very, very difficult conditions, like hot, deep sea, hot vents. And they sit there and they let nutrient-rich water kind of wash over them. And they absorb these nutrients. And they just sit there and they're like a little blob. But if anything happens and the nutrients stop, this particular one that we're looking at, it grows tails. And they just come out and they just start spinning.
What, like squiggly tails, like you'd see on biology pictures?
Yeah, like long squiggly, thin, squiggly tails. And they come out and they basically propel this thing. They're not like E. coli. They don't sort of go right and go over that direction.
Yeah.
They just kind of go, I'm moving. And hopefully they settle somewhere where the nutrients are...
I see, it's spreading.
And then if they find that thing, then they're happy again, the tails fall off.
So it's just simply to allow them to move and to propagate effectively.
Yeah. And then they don't keep them afterwards because there's no need. There's no need. In this time at the moment where we're concerned about climate change.
Yeah.
The seas are getting warmer. The seas are getting more acidic. This is perfect for the archaea. This is like, we've always got such a human-centric view of like, it's like save the planet. It's not saving the planet for the planet's sake. It's saving the planet for humans. We can all die off and life will continue. And the archaea would be very, very happy because they've got brilliant. It's more acidic and hot. And
more room.
We can multiply and this is fantastic. So we were sort of thinking about how archaea is sort of the ideal sort of post-climate change life form. And this idea that could we design this sort of robot one with these tails, and it's all modelled on the latest research that Amanda's doing. So they do this cryomicroscopy where they sort of... Because they're trying to study these tails, because basically they're incredibly simple motors, and that they want to understand them so they can build them. And the idea is that could you create a thing with these drills on, or take off the tails, replace it with drill bits, put it inside a human body, and it would go and seek out cancer cells and drill into them and kill them. And
wow.
This is actually the research they're doing.
Yeah.
And so it's like, serious stuff. So we took this as a sort of conceptual vehicle for this sort of post-climate change world, and taking the idea of sort of uploading, could you take your human conscious and upload it to this device, and it could live on, this could be, what you live on as once the world is no longer capable of sustaining human life.
Or it could be what we send to the stars, to other planets.
If they're hot and
which,
acidic.
like a lot of them may be. I'm thinking of Venus. Yeah. No, but you built this little robot. Mm-hmm. It's obviously not as small as a real one. How big is it?
Our one, it's about 14, 15 centimetres diameter.
Okay, and it sits in tanks. In
a tank of water, we've got air bubbling up, so it looks like a sort of deep sea vent, and it spins its tails. Because like the real archaea, it's not a sort of directed thing. It's obviously in a state of distress because it's got tails. But that would be a much less interesting artwork if it was just a 3D blob in a tank. But it's got this neural network in it and this sort of learning thing, which is a complete over-engineering of it. It's a conceptual choice rather than we're not trying to solve any kind of problem. We would like to take this robot and put it in water like the sea and have it swim, and that would, go swimming with.
So in what way have you over-engineered the neural net then?
It doesn't really need one.
It's simply that.
Because normally when you have a neural network, you have a bunch of data and you're trying to devise a system which can solve a particular problem. But there isn't a problem. It's got a sensor in there, and it's always recording its velocity and how fast the tail spin, and what its direction it's facing in 3 dimensions, and how it moves around in 3 dimensions. So it's recording all this data, but it's not trying to solve any particular problem because it's not trying to sort of move anywhere in particular.
And this is why you would want, for instance, it to go into the sea to see what it did.
Again, that's the sort of conceptual thing of sort of putting it into... salt water is even worse.
It's corrosive, isn't it?
Yeah, it would not last for more than a couple of hours probably. But just the idea of sort of putting it into the environment which it was actually sort of designed to.
It would be interesting to see if the emergent behaviour of it matched the real things, wouldn't it? I mean, that's...
Yeah. Or if we could get loads of them. You know.
Oh, God, yeah. Talk to me a little bit then about the neural net side of this, because obviously, as we've discussed, you've come up through primarily initially a technical sort of interest in programming and used your creativity through that as your medium.
Yeah.
But what's happening now, of course, is a massive boom in all things artificial intelligence. In my day job, I'm up to my neck in machine learning at the minute just for train timetables. Right. But nonetheless, you know, it's literally impacting all sorts of processes. But from an artist's point of view, how do you think that is affecting practice of artists, the ones who are using it?
You know, these are not new techniques. The way that they do these sort of forward and backward propagation networks, and you know, it's been around since the 60s, I think. You know, technology has got to the point where we can realistically crunch these enormous data sets in a quick enough time to actually do something useful, which is why we've got this big boom in this stuff now. And I actually did a course on all this stuff so I could really understand it and actually program it myself. And in some ways I found it's one of those technologies where the actual nuts and bolts of the technology is quite boring. You can do it on paper, it's just a sort of process you go through, but the implications of what you can do with it are really fascinating.
Well, I think
life-changing.
I think I'm thinking about it in terms of you as an artist, in the sense that when I went to foundation course, one of the first things I did was learn how to make paint, which was actually mind-blowing. I'd never conceived of it as a school kid that paint was made. It was just there.
And going through the process.
But going through the process and the mortise and pestle and grinding the pigments and things. And then, of course, you get into photography, and one of the beauties of analogue photography is it's chemicals, paper, and you expose to light, and this thing is made. And in a sense, what we're doing with AI and things like this around artworks is we are in the process of making the medium. Would you say?
No, I mean, it's with your paint example and with chemical photography, every little thing about that process you can change, and that will could have a potentially very big result. There's kind of no part of that process that couldn't be sort of slightly tweaked. But with machine learning stuff, the actual crunching of the data is just this set process that just crunches it down to this big matrix that you can multiply the data coming in by, and it's there to solve a problem. It's like if you limited your paint thing and you say, I want a paint that's this colour red and this consistency and has all these properties, that's what I want. And then you just tried all these random combinations. And you're like, no, that's no good. Oh, that one's a bit closer. You know, we'll work towards down that line. But what you end up with is this very specific thing. So I think the problem I have with trying to use it for art is that I like stuff that sort of comes out of the technology. I like stuff like in the photographic process where you can sort of play with stuff, and
so you do cross processing where you mix some chemicals.
So let's see what comes out of this and what happens. But with machine learning, it's the other way around. It's like you have to define the answer that you want, and then you either go towards that or you don't. And that to me seems much more restrictive creatively. Lots of artists working using these networks to produce artworks turned out to sort of have quite a recognisable style. You know, I mean, you get all that style transfer stuff, which is great because people can then get their hands on this technology and do stuff with it. But it's very limited, or it has a domain in which you can operate. And as I say, there's less about the inner workings of this thing. It's kind of, you feed a bunch of data in, it crunches it, and then you get some results out. And as an artist, you feed in weird data, and so you get these more creative results. But you're not getting anything different than if you fed in, you know, a scientific data set, or you're just seeing it in a different way. And it's that rigidity of the process that I find very difficult personally to work with. I'm quite in awe of artists who can do something creative with it, because it's just looking at it, just going, nope. You know, but that's fine because I've got all these other technologies that I can work with.
No, I think going back to my master's degree in the 90s, it was 6 months of here's programming, here's maths, here's physics, here's hardware, and then 6 months of, right, you're the artist, go off and do something with it. And I think people achieve different levels of outputs, let's say, because it is difficult, it's a struggle. It's almost like you've all got the same common tool set, but yet you're expected to provide the diversity that the art world provides. And yet the art world can be anything, as we've known, from biology through to hardcore tech. I don't know whether it's harder or easier these days, in some senses, because you've got so much choice.
People see technology as this other thing, that this other thing has appeared in the past 40, 50 years or something. And the art with technology is somehow this new thing, as photography was, it's just another vein of creative process. I like to contextualise it within a much longer process. It's not something that I see as new. It's all still human creativity. We're all still trying to make sense of the world and ourselves, and we haven't evolved so much in the past few hundred years. As somebody who writes software and I choose to release some and I don't choose to release other stuff, because I know that some software, like I did this video mapping software, Painting with Light, and that was designed from the start primarily for me to do my art. But I kept meeting all these artists and they kept saying, oh, I'd love to do some video mapping, but all the software is really difficult. So I wanted to sort of create this software which would be simple for artists to use, and I teach it in a day. I do these workshops, and artists come from all sorts of technical levels, and I teach them how to do video mapping in a day. They can go and do it. There are certain technologies that, like Instagram filters or something. You've got the same Instagram filters as I have.
Yeah.
So we can both apply those Instagram filters. Before Instagram filters, you'd have to sit there in Photoshop or something, and then before that, you'd have to,
play with chemicals, actually.
Play with chemicals, all this stuff. But now we've just literally got a press, and then you've got a certain look and can adjust that a little bit, but you're democratising creativity. But the more you democratise it, the more limiting it gets. And most people don't want to spend hours and hours and hours tweaking things. They just want to press a thing, and it goes, brilliant, show that to my friends, and there's something kind of fun, which is brilliant that you can do that. But that's not creative in the same way that, these other processes that we do are. And you still need to spend time and learn your craft and learn the underlying processes and really understand them if you're going to create sort of deep work. And it's interesting, like being a sort of a person who writes software. I mean, it's very difficult, I think, for a single person or a very small team of people to write software to the standard that most people expect now. Because distribution-wise, I can just put it on the internet and suddenly the world can download it. But people compare it to Photoshop or Word or something that, these things have been around for 25, 30 years now.
With teams and teams of people on them.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have honed every little bit of this thing. And to release a piece of software that falls down because, you don't have all that resource or stuff, and then is really difficult. I mean, I think I've lived through that time when that was possible. I think it's getting less and less possible, and I think it won't be possible in a sort of generalised way.
How do you know when to stop? I'm a competent programmer, I'm not brilliant, but, knowing when to stop and say that's enough, I find that very hard.
Wouldn't get anything done without deadlines.
No, but I think that's a valid point, because actually, the people listening here who aren't programmers, who aren't necessarily technicians or whatever, but
same for art, same for everything.
This is the same. It's just, how do you know when to stop? And it's an interesting question artists have. I was asked about my own work, series of paintings. They're not. They're a series of unfinished statements or questions to me, because each one's at the point where I think I've formulated the next set of questions rather than answered anything.
Okay.
You're into hardcore computing in a sense, so do you have the same conception as me as the notion of questions and stop and review? And
there's a few different levels, because I generally always write software. There's a software component to all this stuff, and sometimes a hardware component, and that has to work, and that is a thing that just has to happen. It's not an artistic choice, because we ship like our K-bot over to China, and it's in an exhibition for 2 months, and we send them several of these things, because if it stops, then you've got a dead installation sitting, and I can't just fly out there. And so usually when I sort of finish an interactive piece, for instance, I make sure I've got 2 weeks to harden it and to make sure that it's always boots up, and that if there's a power cut or if there's a cleaner takes out the plug of the computer so they plug the Hoover in. From hard experience, then it's got to recover. So there's that kind of level of stuff which nobody is ever aware of, and it's just a painful part of the process that, But then there's the bit which does it achieve the artistic aims. I think generally I'm quite focused on there's a sort of core thing that I'm trying to do with any particular piece, and it achieves that, and then if there's other bits around it. I like work which is quite clear in its intention, but I'm not sort of dictating your experience. It goes back to that sort of VJ experience, which was quite formative, is that when somebody else sees your work, it's not about you telling them, here's my work, look at my brilliant artwork. It's something that triggers in them, and it's all their experience, and it's all what they're bringing to it. And some people just, when people do it because they stand there and they're just looking at it and they're kind of in a trance, and there's this private thing going on, and you'll probably never know what that is, but it's brilliant. I love it when it happens, because you touch them and
you've really reached them,
and they're going to carry you. They're going to carry your work with them for the rest of their life, and that, I think, is one of the most powerful things about doing art, is that you can be part of somebody's psyche for the rest of their life.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because somebody said to me a while ago that they felt a lot of computer art was very pretty and very clever, but didn't make you go, "Oh wow!"
I've had a few.
Yeah, no. I think there is some. I think that's my point. That I get that comment totally.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what you tend to see, and often what translates to TV and websites for display, is pretty, but isn't particularly deep or emotional or whatever. And a lot of the more emotional stuff, I think you often have to experience to some extent. Do you think we are moving into that play and experience world with this sort of approach to things?
I think there's a number of very good digital artists who are incredibly focused on their journeys and producing amazing work. And then there's lots and lots of stuff which is quite, it's such a weird sort of disposable culture. I mean, I was doing this project at the moment, a VR project, and it's about digital preservation. And I'm creating this artwork which is going to go into the collection of Tunbridge Wells Museum, and they commissioned this piece. And originally we were just going to release it sort of for free, and it's a sort of 360 video. And I was going through Instagram again, and if you go through the tab which has got just endless scrolling other people's work, and I was looking, I was going, like, these are brilliant. These are like, it's so inventive, really good. And I'm just scrolling past them, and I'm not giving them any thought. And it's because if you make that thing available, you take away a lot of its value.
Scarcity.
Yeah, and I've always struggled with that in digital art because it's inherently not scarce.
But this is back to Walter Benjamin and all of that sort of stuff about reproduction, isn't it?
Yeah.
The minute you reproduce it, I had this very conversation about my own artwork with a dealer at an exhibition about it. The comment from him was, I could sell this for thousands, except it's digital. And I said, but it's on canvas in a frame.
Yeah.
And I'm only made one.
Yeah.
I'm not making any more. And he said, yeah, but you could. And I said, well, I could go into a gallery and take a high-quality photograph of a painting, render that to canvas, and you wouldn't know the difference if I was careful. So what's the difference? He said, yeah, but it's just different.
Yeah. No, because it's a massive leap for people. The idea that we're going from this unique object that has this aura, people talk about this aura of this object and the unique nature of this thing, to the reproducibility of digital, and it's just, it drives people.
I mean, Warhol explored it, didn't he, with the printing and things, and he took his advertising techniques, but this is a step way beyond that.
It is, but I mean, during that, Warhol didn't. He got very famous, but a lot of the stuff he was doing, he was kind of just people like, you're nuts.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
And it's kind of a similar thing, and the whole digital art sales world.
Does it exist?
It doesn't, and there
Can
are
you tell me where it is?
Yeah, I know. If I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Because it's really scarce, and I'm doing a series of photos, which you might have seen, the algorithmic photography, which is the first time that I've ever actually done any print work, because all the work that I've tended to do has been video-based or some sort of active element. But it was a way of finding a process that encapsulates motion in a still image. So it's 5 minutes of video, and then I feed it through the software that I've written that goes through every frame of the video is 25 frames per second, and it takes some or none of the information of every frame and feeds it into a final image, depending on the algorithm. So you get trails of birds flying through the air, and it sort of reveals the motion of the world. And I thought, this is great, I've finally got prints, I can sell them, I'm going to be a millionaire. And people really like the images, and I'm really happy with what they look like and how they turn out. And I'm having a hell of a time selling them, because they're a first-class digital artwork, and I could print them out in myriad of forms, and I can sign them or not sign them, or do them as limited edition or not. Or
you could give them to a machine to learn how to do different versions of them.
So it's very difficult to see a clear way of bringing those to market when there's so many traditional artists or artists that work with traditional materials. It's not like galleries and curators are desperate for an amount of artists. They may all be looking for the next thing. But they don't need to sort of worry about digital artists, because they've got plenty of...
No, I mean, I tackled the same problem by trying to make all my trauma paintings be simulacra of real paintings. And even down to putting pseudo-plastic wood frames with fake woodworm holes in, replica frame. But literally...
Nice touch.
Yeah, well, no, do you know what? It made them.
Yeah.
It's really weird. I'm convinced it was right, and I went to the framer and said, I want 30 of these or whatever. And he said, I can get them from China, It's like, classic artist thing of taking it from whatever's available and put them on, and they came to life. And that's when the concept actually finally gelled.
Right.
But even then, I get challenged on this same problem from a dealer. It's never been the same in the 30 years I've been working with computers now. I mean, it's just people just can't handle it. They'll put it in a show somewhere, but there's nothing else beyond that often.
Yeah. But then I think someone like Banksy, who has maintained it's a very strange relationship where, it's obviously like this big corporation almost, is that's doing these non-permanent works that could be reproduced because there's, sort of stencil-based, and then he does them on a concrete wall, and then people are buying the wall.
But this is how they're making them permanent, by buying the wall, isn't it?
Yeah, but because they're sort of desperate to sort of buy into that thing, and it's like, so, it's a very sort of inventive way of doing it. With digital, there just isn't that moment where it's going to sort of flip over. I think it would be a gradual thing.
I think so.
I mean, it's like video art is still not considered.
It's just coming into its own, I think.
It's just got that legacy.
Because we've now all got screens and we've got,
Well, also it's been
around long enough.
Yeah.
But there's that place in Germany, isn't there? The digital art store. I forget the name of it. That they're keeping 6 versions of each bit of technology in order to display things alongside it. So there's also that physical redundancy sometimes in digital art that you end up only with a recording of it.
Recently I went to Tate's stores and I saw their digital and video thing. And it's this massive big warehouse building, all temperature controlled, and you've got all these boxes and they've got all these paintings in, and on every box is like, it's Duchamp, and, and it's just... It was a very wonderful, strange experience. And then you go up to this other room, and in this corner, this small corner, there's those shelves with the handles that roll back and forth. And that was all of the digital video stuff. And there was all these different, every kind of media you could possibly imagine, mini discs and pneumatic tapes and all this stuff. But there's so much there,
Have you given any thought to something like Archaebot can be archived? I suppose a physical robot can, but the technology itself might decay or degrade.
I've sort of been thinking a lot about this. I mean, this VR piece is really about that and the choices that I made for how I made it, because it's not an interactive thing, because it's a video and I'm giving the museum, I'm giving them all the assets and I'm using Blender, which is this open source 3D rendering package. It's been around for 25 years. The challenge was to create a piece that would last for 20 years. So you could, in theory, re-render out the video at 8K or as new technology kind of comes along. So I had to sort of limit the choices to match the longevity. So ArchaeaBot, it uses a particular size of motor, and we could do the spec for it, and you know, maybe that supplier doesn't do them anymore, but maybe you can cobble something else together, and it's sort of, we use a particular 3D printer, and it's like, well, going to get better in the future, but maybe you can find a chunky one that sort of... I'm very big on digital preservation. I think it doesn't matter what medium you're working in. If you go and see the original version of Guernica, or Monk's The Scream, or one of these paintings, it's a transcendental experience that will never ever be matched by seeing it in a book.
No.
When you're standing there in front of it, it's a completely different thing. Digital is exactly the same.
Lights out, all I do is say so. You're wrong, thinking you're right. I fought you for days.
There you go. That was Alex May, who is clearly a fantastic artist. You can learn more about Alex and his work by going to alexmayarts.co.uk. There's a portfolio of his work there, which includes work that's been shown at places like Tate Modern, Ars Electronica, the V&A, the Royal Academy of Art, and various other places around the world. He's also on Twitter on @AlexMayArts. Thanks again for listening to this episode. If you did enjoy it, we always welcome a review on iTunes. If you do give it a 5-star review, it really helps us go up in the rankings. Also, we are looking at how to record some more of these through the isolation. So if you are an artist that works with technology, or you know of a great artist that you think we should speak to, then get in touch. We are on Twitter too, and we're on @TechniqueUK. We will, of course, be back again next month. In the meantime, take very good care of yourself. Goodbye.